Well, Mr. Fowler, why don't you just talk about growing up, and I guess you didn't grow up in Acworth, but just outside of Acworth.
Acworth was always home, and that's where you went to town, and that's where my family always did. We were raised in an era when the treat was getting to go to the pharmacy on the weekend, and if you were real good during the week, you could get a quarter, which would get you a small milkshake and a comic book. If you were bad, you only got a dime, so you had to make a choice about getting a Coke or getting a cheaper comic book.
Or being good.
Or being good. Well, choices were aplenty.
Okay. Well, now, where you grew up, did you consider yourself in Kennesaw or in Acworth?
There was always a tug of war there between the two cities, and they've got tremendous civic pride in both municipalities. Acworth was home. My grandfather, after he sold the property to the county for North Cobb High School, moved into town over off Logan Road. In fact, I guess it's called Logan Park now, or road. That used to be his farm in Acworth, raised cattle. I remember Brahma bull on the property and hogs and everything else. He was always in agriculture one way or another, except he also operated the Feed and Seed, which was across the railroad tracks right off Main Street from what used to be the red light in Acworth, right there in the center of town. And my grandfather operated the Feed and Seed on that side of the tracks.
Now, is it your house that is being restored at the at the park now?
It was my grandfather's house.
Well, that's what I mean.
And as he lived there, to be honest with you, they haven't been by that property in a while. If it was the house that used to be right there off the road, that was the house that he occupied when they had that property.
Yeah, well, when you're going up Logan and where the off to the right is where the headquarters for the
Well,
park.
that's you
and
took
there's
that.
a house right there that they've been renovating.
There was no other house on that property except the house that my grandfather occupied at the time, so I would assume that's the property.
Okay, so that was the Logan house, and then your grandfather?
Yes, sir, and then he moved back over here off Lemon Street, in fact, just up the block here from where we are.
Now, we're talking about grandfather Fowler or grandfather Richards?
Grandfather Fowler.
Okay.
And no disrespect to my grandfather Richards, I was always a Fowler.
Okay. Well, now, where did you start going to school?
Went to Acworth Elementary all the way through to the 8th grade. We were always, in retrospect, there was quite a influence from the Acworth area on the entire Cobb County school system. We all remember Mr. Sprayberry from Sprayberry High School, later on to the school board. There was Joe Hayes, Bill Hamilton, all very esteemed gentlemen that served in the hierarchy of the Cobb School Board Administration and education. Knew them all, had them for classes.
Is that right?
That's right. Bill Hamilton was my 8th grade teacher, and back then corporal punishment was general punishment, and he applied appropriately.
What about Mr. Sprayberry? Did you have any?
Knew Mr. Sprayberry. Obviously, I was quite younger at that time, but everybody knew where the Sprayberry House was when you were circling around and going by Lake Acworth and Acworth Beach. You would come out, and his house would be there on the left.
Okay. And what about Mr. Hayes?
Joe Hayes, a legend, literally. He was one of those gentlemen that put, I started to say fear of respect. He put respect into you for what's right and do it.
Okay. And then did you go to North Cobb High School?
Yes, sir, I did. Graduated in '66. I went from being a big shot at Acworth Elementary to being a nobody, know nothing freshman at North Cobb, and it was quite an exposure. But graduated North Cobb in '66. Very proud of the time spent there and the classmates I had. I find it remarkable that so many of my group, after graduation and on to college and school and in other areas, and a lot of them are coming back now here in just the last 5-6 years, which I find great. And I sort of, when I see them, I say, "Where y'all been?"
So they're retiring back here?
A lot of them are. Yes, they are. So Acworth roots go deep.
Well, what was it like going to school on a site that you would have remembered, I guess, as pasture land when you were
That
growing
and
up.
that and farmland, I rode on the back of a tractor with my father and grandfather on many occasions. The best convenience of it, when my grandfather moved into Acworth, we moved up to the house on the hill directly across the lower drive and gymnasium, and I could literally sit on the front porch and hear the warning bell to get to first class and walk across the street.
Huh. How about that? Well, now, I know there was a story, the competition that you mentioned between Kennesaw and Acworth over where the new high school was going to go. You know,
I'm so sorry. God. I'll turn this off. I get junk calls on my cell phone now, which is infuriating. At home, you sort of expect stuff like that,
Right,
but on
you're
your
not
cell
supposed to
phone,
on your cell phone.
no, not supposed to.
so, okay, so
Yes.
you know, did you know anything about why they picked the Fowler property for the school site?
I guess because my grandfather's willing to sell. In fact, well, they had that property that encompasses all the North Cobb property, all the way up to the foot of Morgan Hill on both sides of the road. My great-great-grandmother's house is the one still standing there at the red lighted intersection where Nowlin Road branches off to go to Autry. Very interesting home. It had 2 double front parlors. I was told that at one time it was a stage stop between destinations from north into Marietta and Atlanta to the south. And the gentlemen and ladies would disembark from the stage or coach, and the gentlemen would go in one parlor and the ladies would go in the other. As years passed on, in those days when someone had passed away in the family, you did not leave them at the funeral home. You brought them home for visitation and viewing. And I remember many an in-law and outlaw in the Fowler family resting in one of those 2 front parlors.
So Nowlin is the correct pronunciation? Nowlin?
Nowlin is the way we always
Yeah.
in fact, my grandfather sold the property there, which is now the Nowlin subdivision, to Tillman Nowlin himself. So all that property was in the family.
But I've been mispronouncing it all these years.
Well, it's like people with McKeever and McEver. So it depends on what day of the week it is, but I find a lot of people give me a double look on McKeever and McEver and Nowlin and Nolan, and I was here when they were here.
Right. Yeah, I know. We had the same thing on our campus of Fry Road or Frey Road.
Speaking of Kennesaw, State has ties to the family as well. My uncle Tony Bryant went with Dr. Surgis from Georgia
Yes,
Tech.
Yes.
My-
First controller.
Yes, Tony Bryant. I grew up going to football games at Georgia Tech with my Uncle Tony when he worked with Georgia Tech. He would take me down, and we would park in his parking place on campus, walk over to the varsity, have a hot dog, and come back. He'd stick me in the north stands. He'd go up the press box. But I grew up watching Georgia Tech football.
Yeah, how about that?
Another angle on Georgia Tech, my father met my mother, though they were both here in Acworth and were a couple years difference in high school. My father met my mother in the Georgia Tech bookstore. So a little ties to Georgia Tech, which really wrangles a family with kids going to Georgia. And I have a son that graduated from University of Georgia, but when it comes to local loyalties, I sort of leaned a little bit to the gold and white.
Generational conflict.
It is in this age.
Now, I can understand why your father was in the bookstore. What was your mother doing in there?
She was working. This is back in the days that
There weren't any female students, I don't think.
No. This is back in the days when ladies, and for many years prior, would take the bus, take the train into Atlanta for meaningful employment, and then take it home. First to the suburbs,
Yeah.
and commuters, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. Well, now, I understand that the Fowler property was a compromise between the 2 cities, wasn't it? And do you know anything about that?
I don't know about any compromise, to be totally candid with you. All I know it's there and was there, and
Well, I guess what
it could be sold as one track. That might have been
I guess what I'd heard is that Kennesaw didn't want the school to be in Acworth, and Acworth didn't want it to be in Kennesaw.
Well, the way they move around city limit signs now, stay tuned, stay tuned. It's sort of like the same kind of rivalry goes back to the infamous location of Kenworth Park on the doorstep of Acworth instead of Kennesaw.
Right.
That's natural community pride.
Well, what was it like growing up on the farm there? Before
Heaven.
that?
It was heaven. I had thousands of acres for a backyard. And back those days, we had great dogs. They were all outside dogs, no dogs in the house. And I would take off down through the woods in the pasture area, always accompanied by one of the household pets and dogs. And these were farm dogs. And and my parents never worried because I was protected. I had one of the dogs with me. And it's literally having multi-thousand acre backyard, and you take a lot for granted when you grow up and you intermingle in the community and others that maybe not have had that marvelous opportunity.
Say something about your parents.
My dad was a high school basketball star, very shy man. He served in World War II, as many did. I can't think of an uncle that wasn't in the service. Came up through Italy in that campaign, received various recognitions, including a Purple Heart. He was a radio and technology expert for what that represented at the time. In fact, upon his return from the service, prior to going to work at Lockheed, he actually opened up, I assume, what would have been the first TV repair shop in the North Cobb area. I was in college before I realized TVs came with backs on them, because every time we had a TV in the house, my father would have the back off of it, tinkering with it. I grew up with the privilege of being able to listen to radio stations all over the country, because he'd have shortwave radios all over the house. He was a CB radio enthusiast. He was somewhat, I guess it was the computer geek of the times, but he was really into radios and that kind of technology. My mom, as I said, her family had moved down from Fairmount, but had well established here in Acworth. My grandfather Richards had a house halfway up Morgan Hill, and then operated a little general grocery store on top of Morgan Hill. For those of you who aren't familiar with those names, Morgan Hill's that little bump in the road before you go over the hill to get to Kennesaw. And those memories I have there is like we were always here in one shape, form, or fashion. But my mom worked at the old Allen's 5 and 10. Later, with Miss Jean Greer, operated Allen's 5 and 10's Fabric Center that would have been located directly across the street from City Hall here. And I remember many a night evening, when I'd be home from school, I would drive up to pick Mom up, because my dad would work different shifts at Lockheed. My father, I guess this is self-serving. My father helped Larry Nelson get a job at Lockheed after he returned from the service. Larry and my father had a lot of likenesses between them. Larry had problems with the stress of military service and circumstance, and so did my father. And my father had great empathy for Larry and became great friends with the Nelson family. In fact, it was Larry's dad, Vernon, that introduced me into Little League Baseball.
Wow. Did your father play golf?
No, golf was a million light years. Golf was something you'd watch on TV on Sunday. Now, since then, it's ironic. I started following golf in the 60s into the 70s, particularly the British Open, of all things. But I'm quite a golf enthusiast now. Enthusiast, I didn't say good at it. I'm very enthusiastic about buying a dozen balls to get to go play, and hope I've got enough.
Okay. So you graduated from high school in '66?
Yes,
and
sir.
went straight to Georgia Tech?
No, I didn't. I wasn't smart enough to go to Georgia Tech, to be totally candid with you. As many did, first went to Middle Georgia College in Cochran. There's many a PhD from Georgia Tech walking around that first attended Middle Georgia College. But for whatever reason, well, there was a reason I'll go into. Once I finished at Middle Georgia, which was junior college at the time, I ended up going to Georgia Southern.
Oh,
And graduated from there in '70, class of '70.
okay.
And the reason I ended up at Georgia Southern is went on a couple of field trips down there from Middle Georgia, liked the campus, liked the school, liked the surroundings, and knew a young lady going there at the time. So
Okay.
it was, I enjoyed my time at Georgia Southern. I was very fortunate. I had a chance to serve many years later on the Georgia Southern Foundation Board of Directors. I'm true blue.
Okay.
My other favorite color is orange, though.
Okay. Okay, so you graduated in '70, and then you got a job with the Cobb Marietta Water Authority?
Yes, sir, for a few months, 3-4 months. And this was back in the days of the lottery. And I received my notice to
The
show
draft
up.
lottery.
The draft lottery. The lottery came out at 123 for me, and I got my draft notice to show up for the physical and what have you, and of course reported that to my employer, and the then general manager of the Water Authority, Calvin F. Simmons, came to me and said, "Roy, you can qualify for an occupational deferment being in this business." And I said, I appreciate that, sir. I would always like to return here, but I've been called and I'm going to go. And I was chastised to some degree for that from others. But the fact is, I had a lot of friends and acquaintances that were called, and some had volunteered that didn't come back. And I said, I don't think I would have ever volunteered, but now I've been called and I'm going to go, and did.
So what did you do in the military?
Spent 2 years declining to go to warrant officer school and become a helicopter pilot.
Declining?
Yeah, the declining, yes. My draft group was a very interesting group. The median education level in the draft group I went through with was about 19 years. We had accountants. We had people that were already established professionals that had gone to school and then been called on the lottery. And they, like me, accepted it. Observation, no disrespect to the military now or ever, but at that time, the most trouble that came in the cohesiveness of military units at that time were the people that had volunteered for 3 years instead of us 2-year draftees. It was like, whoops, what have I gotten into? And
You can't take it back.
can't take it back, no disrespect intended. Took all the jungle training and what have you, and at the last minute, and I say this with as much sincerity as I can, it seemed very ironic at the last moment assignments were being made to next report to San Francisco for demarcation or other places for Europe service. It seemed very strange that the higher educated you were at that time, the more likely you were to draw another assignment. It gives me chill bumps to say, and I don't mean any disrespect. It could have just been my perception, but it seemed awful strange. But I ended up not only in Germany, I ended up in West Berlin, which was spit and polish. We were still guarding Hess. He was in the Spandau prison at the time. And we were 150 yards away from the wall. Went through Checkpoint Charlie into East Berlin many a time until I got a higher security clearance, and then I wasn't allowed to go into East Berlin. But I've been through all the checkpoints. People always think of Berlin and Checkpoint Charlie, but there's also a Checkpoint Alpha, checkpoint Bravo, and then the ultimate checkpoint Charlie. Alpha is going from West Germany into East Germany. Bravo was going out of East Germany into Berlin, West Berlin, and then Charlie, of course, was going from West Berlin into East. One of the glaringest lessons I ever learned in my life was the difference of capitalism and democracy and freedom versus communism. West Berlin was color TV, literally.
Right.
Vibrant city, vibrant community, vibrant economy. East Berlin was literally black and white. There were still bombed out ruins in East Berlin when I was there.
Yeah.
It was quite an education.
I guess it was. And so you did that for 2 years and then came back to the Water Authority?
Yes, sir, I did. After, again, declining, going to warrant officers and officers candidate school because they wanted to, and I can appreciate that, promote educational based and services and opportunities. And I appreciated that, but I was like, I was called, I went, I'm done, and did a lot of thinking in the service about career, and chose to return to the water treatment industry and the Water Authority, and then after 44 years, I wasn't sad about that either.
No, I guess. Well, what did you major in college that prepared you for working for the Water Authority?
Interestingly enough, nothing. Social studies. I was going to be a teacher.
Oh.
BS in education, and don't ask for the definition of BS because I'll no. But it was very interesting. Childhood dream, teach, coach ball. Athletics was very important to me. During my North Cobb days, we were a Class A school, and everybody played everything. Everybody played football. Everybody played basketball. We talked them into getting a baseball team. And Jerry Ingram, another North Cobb giant in education, Board of Education as well, was his first year at North Cobb. That was mine, and got to know Coach Ingram very well. They couldn't get anybody. When we went to the administration and said, look, we've got guys here that have been playing youth baseball together for a long time. We can field a baseball team. When North Cobb first was created, they had a baseball team, didn't have any real baseball players, and didn't do well and dropped the program. We went to the administration and begged them to field a baseball team, and Coach Ingram was the only one willing to put up with it, and he did. The first year, we played an undefeated non-region schedule because they wouldn't let us play a region schedule on our first year. Second year, we won the region again, won the North Georgia Class A championship, and lost the state finals to Americus. And we did okay.
That's right. All right. So you came back and you made a career in the Water Authority, and you became general manager in 1996.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you just talk a little bit about the history of the Water Authority? I know it went way back.
1953, the Water Authority was created. Many local community leaders were behind the effort. Cobb County government didn't think they could quite afford to do it at the time. So the Water Authority was created by an act of the Georgia State Legislature to become a political subdivision of the state of Georgia, and as well as Cobb County, and to be regionally represented by the cities and administration of the Cobb County and Marietta governments to provide dependable source and drinking water, which we did. We had intakes on both, and still do, on the Chattahoochee River as well as Lake Altoona. One of the first multi-facility systems in the Southeast, became the largest water wholesaler in the Southeast. Now there's some question now, and I'm sort of out of the business, but the city of Birmingham might very well have developed a larger wholesale regional system, but we served up to over 1 million people and more in the last years of my administration. Proudest thing I am of professional accomplishment is during my term as general manager, we obtained the first triple AAA bond rating that triple A. This was prior to Cobb County receiving its triple. We became the first regional authority that had no taxing authority of any kind. First non-tax supported entity ever to receive a triple.
The cities and municipalities paid for the water.
Correct.
Wholesale.
Wholesale rates. In fact, the Water Authority, as they were contemplating the location of Southern Tech, the Water Authority offered the plumb to Southern Tech that if they came to Cobb County and located, that they'd become a wholesale customer, not a retail customer. Now, unfortunately, as time evolved, Kennesaw State made the same overture, and it didn't work out. But the Water Authority's wholesale customers were all the municipalities in Cobb, the Cobb County water system itself. We also serve water to Cherokee County, Paulding County, Douglas County, and Fulton County.
I was going to ask you how far your reach spread.
Every county contiguous with the border of Cobb County, we served in some capacity, sometimes as backup, sometimes as main source. But it was quite a unique concept at the time, and has been attempted to be duplicated many times. The biggest spotlight, I guess, on the Water Authority in those days was the fact that the city of Atlanta was really going through some trials and tribulations with the administration of its water production and water treatment and water department. And we would have a major line break and literally have the streets repaired and the line back in service within hours, if not no more than a day. And then unfortunately our friends to the south sometimes might take a week or two, maybe, to get something fixed. Of course, we weren't having to dig up things that had been paved over for 100 years. I remember us laying 36-inch lines in our loop around Cobb County to help us branch out to the counties and then serve internally to the city, to sort of a wheel and hub effect as far as our wholesale transmission lines. The outer loop around Cobb County was 7 miles longer than 285 around Atlanta. But we laid many of those lines along dirt roads, and people said, we're never going to need that much water. And we said, hang on. And they did, and we have.
Now, does the Water Authority have the sewage treatment plants?
No, we deal,
Cobb County.
as we refer to it in the business, we deal strictly in smooth water. Lumpy water is handled by the Cobb County water system, and I might add they are award-winning. As the Water Authority is in its discipline, Cobb County water system has been award-winning in its wastewater treatment. Their concepts in long-range planning with the interceptor tunnels and what have you was the kind of thing that Atlanta needed to do 25 years ago and never did. Cobb County, once again, was ahead of the bar.
Well, now, was Harold Willingham still involved when you started working for the authority?
He was previously on the board, but Mr. Willingham and his services to the board, he had retired from that juncture. It was a 3-man board when I first came on. Mr. Barrett, Ernest Barrett. I was known in the early days as one of Mr. Barrett's young lions. There was a little group of us that he used to call on us.
How about that?
And they called us Barrett's young lions, but he was quite an interesting gentleman.
Yes.
No question about that. And Bill Roner represented the city of Merida. Bill Roner.
Roner, yes.
He was a banker. And then you had Mayor Jimmy Quarles from Smyrna. And those were the 3 members of the Water Authority Board. So
when you started with the system?
When I started with the system, and the Water Authority first came in, as I mentioned previously, its inception was in '53 when the legislation was passed. They were producing water by '55, and then I joined them on my return from the service in the early '70s.
Yeah. What was your first job after you came back from the service?
Any entry-level person that has the qualifications is going to end up midnight shift operator. Nowadays, the complexity of the business usually requires advanced degrees to enter into any form of management. I literally came, though I had the background and training, I was at the right place at the right time, and gained all the professional certifications and with my formal education background, was able to rise up through the ranks. But I paid my dues on the entry level, and I'm always glad that I did, because it always gave me a chance to better communicate with the front line of defense. Now, we have all the technology that a man and or person could ever dream of having as far as detection and scientific methodology for testing the quality and things of that nature. But the first line defense is the operator himself. And was able to always have a great relationship with the operating staff that are the true guardians of our health, 24/7. When you're home having turkey on Thanksgiving, there's an operator at the water plant eating a bologna sandwich where you can wash your dishes. We don't have snow events. We have sleepovers, but we don't have snow events. We have holidays on the rotating basins, but somebody's always there. And it's 24/7, 7 days a week, 366 leap year.
Wow. So you get the water out of Alatoona and out of the Chattahoochee, and then you treat the water?
Yes, sir. We analyze, we keep Virgil on the both the river conditions and the lake conditions. We can take Lake Altoona, for example, we can take from different elevations. And depending seasonal changes and Mother Nature and things of that nature, we can make choices as to what elevation that we'll take the water from, and pick the not easiest, but the best suited for treatment. And 24 continuous hours of monitoring. Some of the monitoring is instantaneously online, electronically. We back up everything that is done by the instrumentation with a cross-check manually. So chemistry, hydraulics, physics, it all comes into play.
How many treatment plants are there in Cobb?
In Cobb,
For the system?
the Water Authority operates large campuses for both locations.
Okay.
There are multiple units on either location. So there's redundancy for everything out of necessity. To be totally candid with you, we used to provide aerial shots on our website. 9/11 changed all that.
Oh, wow.
That's the first thing we did, was lock the gates out of necessity.
Right.
Not only the interruption of the infrastructure, but it's a wonderful business. We deal with toxic chemicals, high voltage electricity, and water under pressure. So you got to know what you're doing, and the person that knows how to mess with it can mess with it, so we have to protect.
Sure. How big can Metro Atlanta get before we run out of water?
Well, it's like the water wars never go away. I was on the cusp of the water wars back in the late 80s when we first started discussing with the Corps of Engineers additional allocation out of Altoona and elsewhere. Our friends.
Alabama and Florida don't like that.
Yeah, well, like I say, I was involved in that since '88. Served on the Governor's Advisory Council. We had many deals, all but consummated many times. Fortunately or unfortunately, with the changes in gubernatorial leadership from time to time, everything had been just accomplished over either the last 4 or 8 years. Somehow or another was, we can do better, or we can do different. And that's no disrespect to the governors past that served and what have you, but sometimes it'd be a change of direction and the state would literally have to start all over again. That being said, latest, and you need to stay tuned for this, latest is right now the most recent court rulings are in favor of Georgia being able to sustain a reasonable growth population without undue limitations. So all 3 states have to play by the same rules, and Georgia cannot be held accountable to lack of stewardship either to our south or to our west.
Well, maybe as a way of winding up, why don't you just talk about what you think about Acworth nowadays?
I get chill bumps when I think of Acworth in the old days. As I'd mentioned to you before, just preparing for this, it was like my head was going to explode. Walking out of my grandfather's grocery store, feeding seed, across the railroad tracks, going to Chandler's barber shop to get a haircut, not quite making it, and going to Allen's 5 and 10 and buying a toy instead, and thinking my grandfather wouldn't notice I hadn't had a haircut. Activities at the farm, coming to town. The profile and obviously the appearance of Acworth has changed a great deal to many, drastically for some of us that have been here forever. I have many dear and close friends that I've seen previously interviewed, quite impressive. Their pride in the community and their contributions to instill a sense of the past and what it holds and the future holds for us. But as I jokingly tell them sometimes, where y'all been? We've been here forever. Outside of school and Uncle Sam, Cobb County, and particularly the Acworth area has always been home.
Well, I meant to ask you about your volunteer work with Acworth baseball.
It's one of those kind of things you thought you'd never do and end up doing. Following Pop Willis was a heck of a challenge, but what he instilled in the community and supporters like Eddie Jones Tire, that's Plug Eddie, was always heavily involved. The community was involved, and it was easy to get wrapped up in that. The time and the hours go so fast. And in retrospect, you look back and said, oh, if I had to do that all over again, would I? And then you still, even nowadays on Facebook, I'll get a peep from a former player that I had coached at a younger age and still calls you coach. And there's no greater compliment in the world than to be called coach by a young man.
You want to say anything on the interview about collecting water bills in Acworth?
Just in passing, one of my obligations from time to time would be back when Acworth was still a wholesale customer. Acworth has since sold its water system to Cobb County, appropriately so. That I would come to the city council meetings and deal with everybody from Mayor Fowler to Mayor Donahue to Mayor Gibson about paying Acworth's delinquent wholesale water bill to the county. But it all worked out. In fact, Mike Donahue even served a couple of terms on the Water Authority Board. So I knew Mike and know his wife from just growing up. I was a young classman when Mike and his brother were upperclassmen at North Cobb. So everybody knows everybody in Acworth, or should.
Anything that you wanted to talk about when it was going through your head this last several days that we haven't covered?
15 minutes from now, I'll have a million things to tell you, but no, I appreciate the relief, because once I was approached about considering chatting with you, it was like I can never say everything I want to. But all I can say is this is home, and for those of you new to the area, welcome. For those of you returning, the welcome. Where you been? Glad you're back. And it's a great little community. It's home, and I'm proud of it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and I appreciate your efforts in this so much.
You're welcome.